Well, mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, good people of Hanover County, my dear, dear friends, please do allow me an introduction. The name is General Lafayette, though I believe that most of you know me far better by my name of the Ancien Régime, of the old order of the Révolution here in America. And that, of course, is Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Gilbert du Motier, le Marquis de Lafayette. Would you like to repeat that, monsieur? What a pleasure and honor it is to see all of you here on this simply magnificent day. Oh, how it is hard to believe it is already the 30th day of October of the year 1824. But nonetheless, a day of celebration, is it not? I will always love you Americans. For in reality, you have no idea of what I am celebrating, but most of you are willing to celebrate right along with me. You know, I think that is a credit to the American people, how very optimistic you are, or simply in want of a party. Well, how could you know, my dear friends, for I, General Lafayette, have only recently returned back to America after 40 long years. Indeed, my friends, the last time I set foot upon American soil was just after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which of course occurred in September of 1783, ending the Great War for American freedom. So thus, in 1784, I returned for 5 months to celebrate with all of you, my beloved brothers and sisters here in America. But friends, even though 40 years have passed, we must never forget how that independence was in fact achieved. For all of those brave soldiers, sailors, and Marines alike who have fought and bled upon countless battlefields to achieve American freedom, let us applaud them all! Well, my friends, I have been invited back to America courtesy of your very own President of these United States, Monsieur James Monroe, to be what he is calling a guest of the nation, to tour all 24 United States. Can you imagine, 24? Do you realize the last time I was here you had but 13? Oh, goodness, at this rate you'll have as many as 50 one day. Could you imagine? Well, my friends, as so many adventures begin, mine began in New York City on the 16th day of August of this year, 1824, in front of 40,000 of its inhabitants. What a welcome indeed. Then I went northwards to Boston, where, of course, I met with your second president, Monsieur John Adams, who referred to me as having a canine appetite for popularity. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But then southwards to Philadelphia City, where I went to that place where you declared for independence. In fact, I referred to it as Independence Hall. I hope that name will stick. Then a bit further south to Baltimore City, and then, of course, to Washington City, where I met with the president himself. Then, of course, upon the 19th of October, I went to Yorktown, that place where we won the greatest victory in the war. Madam, I saw you there. Wasn't that a magnificent celebration? Oh, they were dancing many of the country dances, and your minuet was superb. Oh, what a time was to be had. And I saw you there as well, monsieur. You dipped your cup into the punch bowl many times. But, you know, I think there were many toasts that were to be had. But, you know, my friends, now that I have returned back to America, I am certainly reminded of what first inspired me to cross the great ocean and to take part in this noble crusade. For friends, I first heard of this cause back in 1775. I was but a sous-lieutenant back then, a second lieutenant, newly promoted to the rank of captain. In truth, only because my father-in-law owned the regiment. So it was a bit of a wedding gift. Well, there I had found myself, billeted in the eastern part of France, in a city called Metz. And as was commonplace back then, we would often have these grandiose dinner parties with all of the most noble officers and attendants. And there we would typically speak about the various subjects of the day. Perhaps a war that had begun, a war that had concluded, a new treaty that had been signed, perhaps a new innovation in strategy or in tactics. But on one occasion we had a very special guest, and this guest was none other than the Duke of Gloucester. Indeed, the brother to George III, the King of England. But unlike his brother, the King of England, the Duke of Gloucester was actually rather sympathetic to the American cause. In fact, many were of the opinion that he thought America should be free and independent. So we all listened in on what he had to say. Now, of those noble officers in attendance that evening, there was the famous Comte de Broglie. Many of you, no doubt, remember him from his grand exploits during the 7 Years' War. And there were even some who stated that he was going to be given command of the Continental Army in the place of General Washington himself. Now, the Comte de Broglie was a fine officer, to be sure, but I think we are all thankful that General Washington remained in command, are we not? Goes without saying, there was, of course, my beloved friend, Le Baron de Kalb, the one man perhaps most responsible for bringing me here to America. I can still recall receiving the dispatch of the news of his death after the Battle of Camden in August of 1780. Most distressful to me, but even more so to the great cause of American freedom, for he was such a fine officer. There was, of course, the Chevalier de Buisson. Madame, the Chevalier de Buisson, I thought I recognized you. Oh, my friends, what a rare coincidence. Madame, you danced a minuet with the Chevalier. It was at the last of the Queen's birthday parties. Oh, you are being quite modest, Madame. You are still the talk at Versailles. Dear friends, she danced the most magnificent minuet I have ever seen dance before. Do you recall the name? Oh, how could you forget, Madame? It was called Le Dauphin, perfectly stepped. Not one error. You must have worked with your dance master for weeks, if not months. Oh, and upon conclusion of that perfect minuet, do you recall what the Queen said to you? C'est magnifique. Oh, bien fait. Also, yes, of course, Madame. Well done, indeed. And you know the Queen never gave compliments to anyone but herself. Do you know, Madame, if only I could find a few musicians here this afternoon, we could all see an example of that minuet. Would you like that, my friends? Oh, alas, Madame, who are we kidding? We'll never find any musicians awake before 6 p.m. Another time, Madame, but rest assured you are still the talk at Versailles. Oh, forgive me, friends, I have veered off the course of my subject. Let me return. So, that evening, we spoke of many subjects, to include the fighting at Lexington and at Concord, the Grand Congress in Philadelphia, and of course, the great man himself, that of General Washington. So it was by the conclusion of this meal that I told my brother officers that I was ready and willing to fight and, if need be, die for this cause. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Why, Monsieur le Marquis? Why would you want to go and fight and perhaps die in another man's war? For France and England were not at war at that moment. Why would you want to risk yourself in such an endeavor? Well, I think you know the answer to that question. For this had been a war like none other in the history of man, had it not? This was a war of great ideas, of the freedom, even the liberation of mankind, a war that had embraced the ideas of the great thinkers of what we often refer to as this enlightened age, or this age of reason, with men like Voltaire and Rousseau and Montesquieu. And what were they speaking of? Representation in government, of an equality of mankind, that a man, no matter what class in society he might be born, whether he be black or white, Catholic or Protestant, rich or poor, slave or free, should not make a difference, but simply by the way in which that person would carry themselves and prove themselves in this world. My dear friends, after these more than 40 long years, are you still in agreement with these great ideas? Well, I am pleased to hear it, for as am I, and as I shall continue to be until my dying day. So that evening I rose up from my chair, I drew my sword. I came towards my host, the Comte de Broglie, and told him I was ready to put my colors to this great and noble cause. But, alas, you know what he said to me? Sit down, Monsieur le Marquis. I believe you've had a bit too much wine this evening. But friends, of course it was not the wine. It was simply my enthusiasm for this great and noble cause. So what could I do? Well, I thought about it for some days, and then I said to myself, alas, I shall go to Versailles. I shall present myself at court in front of the King, Louis XVI, and the Queen, Marie Antoinette, and ask them if I might have permission to go. So off I go to Versailles, presenting myself at court in front of the King and Queen of France, asking them if I might go on this grand crusade, and, well, what do they say? Come on, give it a try, monsieur. You've got a 50-50 chance.
No!
Oh, wow, he says it with such panache. Bravo, my friend. You are absolutely correct, my friend. He says no. He says, oh, je regrette, monsieur le marquis. Ce n'est pas possible, c'est un moment rare quand la France et l'Angleterre ne sont pas en guerre. Je ne souhaite pas que vous en commenciez une. I'm sorry, monsieur le marquis. It is just not possible. It is a rare time in French history where France and England are not actually at war. And I do not wish for you to start yet another war with that horrible nation of merchants, as we French used to refer to England back then. Well, my dear friends, that should have been the end of it. For when the King and Queen of France say you cannot do something, well, of course you cannot. But I did the unthinkable. I disobeyed them. I left my regiment. I went to the western part of France, and there at the port city of Bordeaux, I purchased a ship fittingly called La Victoire, the victory, for that is what I was in search of, victory in this great cause. Well, of course, the king and queen soon found out that I, the Marquis de Lafayette, had disobeyed them, and do you think they were pleased with this? Au contraire, quite displeased. In fact, so much so that they sent out soldiers to try and apprehend me. And if I was to be apprehended, of course I was to return back to my regiment at Metz, or worse, to my father-in-law at Marseille. So I had to act with the utmost secrecy, preparing all that I would need, a crew to man my ship, companions to join me, all of the supplies that I would need, for I did not know when or if I would even return back to France. Well, when all was prepared, the harbor master at Bordeaux inquired, "What is your destination, monsieur? Where are you headed?" He did not realize I was the Marquis de Lafayette, for of course I had disguised myself. Young man, if you had to disguise yourself, and you wanted no one to know it was you, what might you wear as a disguise?
Peasant clothes.
Look at that, he's got a plan, you better watch out. He said peasant clothes, interesting. Yes, well, I have a funny story to tell you. The English newspapers reported that I, the Marquis de Lafayette, disguised myself, are you ready for this? In a woman's gown. Can you imagine? Well, don't imagine that. No, do not believe everything you read or hear, especially if it is written by an Englishman about a Frenchman. No, there was no woman's gown for me, but instead I simply disguised myself as a merchant, there to take part in a bit of commerce with the people of Spain. So not having any issue with this, they of course allowed me to pass, and true to my word, I did go from France to Spain, but what would be my ultimate destination? America, exactement. Now, this journey took me 8 long weeks. Have any of you been to sea for 8 weeks? Always one or two out there, and I thank you for your service. But I will tell you this, I am glad that I joined the French army and not the French Navy, because I was seasick nearly every day of that journey. But after those 8 long weeks, as I looked over the bow of my ship, I could see the Americas for the first time. And we had landed at a place called Georgetown in South Carolina. How I recall that evening perfectly well. For even though it was evening, the moon was so bright that it illuminated everything that we looked upon. So as I put my foot upon American soil for the first time and met you, the good people of the United States, well, what do you think my first impressions were of you, the people of the United States of America? It's better not to answer the question. It was not a very good one, for you know, the first Americans I met here in America tried to kill me. Yes, not a good beginning. So we had landed at the plantation of a Monsieur Auger, a Benjamin Sugar, or Auger is the way they pronounce it there in South Carolina, an ardent patriot, but he had mistaken me and my companions for Englishmen. Can you imagine, madame, mistaking me for an Englishman? Do you know, in hindsight, I don't think the moon really was that bright. Well, I quickly assured them that we were not. We were there to help them in their great and glorious cause, and once they realized this, they welcomed us with open arms. But, friends, we were not there upon a holiday, were we? We needed to make our way as quickly as possible to Philadelphia City. So, after bidding farewell, after thanking them for their kindness, their hospitality, and most assuredly for not killing us, we began that long journey northwards. It took us several more weeks, but eventually I arrived in the largest city in former English North America, Philadelphia, and its 40,000 souls. Now, my friends, before I had departed France, I had met with one of your American agents, a representative from Connecticut. His name was Silas Dean. And this man was giving out what we call promissory notes. And as the name implies, it promised something. It promised that if I, the Marquis de Lafayette, were to come to America, I would be granted the rank of Major General in the American Army. So there I was, promissory note in hand, and I approached your Congress. And I said to them, honor me so by granting me a command in the Continental Army that I too might fight against tyranny. And now what does Congress say to me?
No.
Oh, bravo, bravo, bravo. Well done, my friend. Yes, exactly. They say, thank you for coming, Monsieur le Marquis. We appreciate you offering your services, but we don't need, nor do we even want your help. Now, can you imagine this? What I had endured up to that moment? I had left my regiment. I had disobeyed the King and Queen of France. I had traveled 8 long weeks at sea, seasick nearly every day. I had nearly been killed by the first Americans I met here in America. I had traveled from South Carolina all the way to Philadelphia in the month of July, just to be told by your members of Congress to return back to France. Well, I ask all of you, what would you have done? Would you have returned back to France? Of course not. You would persevere, you would overcome, you would triumph in the end, just as I had done. So again, I attempted to speak to Congress, saying, very well, you will not give me a command of soldiers, but perhaps you will allow me to serve as an aide-de-camp to General Washington, as an assistant to the great man. And again they say to me, I'm sorry, Monsieur le Marquis, but once again, this is just not possible. Besides, we don't have enough money to pay you. Well, I finally said boldly to your members of Congress, then I shall serve at my own expense. And would you know it, with those immortal words, your Congress immediately made me a Major General. I could not imagine this good fortune, for I have told you already I was but a captain in the French army, and a newly promoted one at that. But here in America, I was made a Major General, a General of Division. I could command upwards of 5,000 soldiers, yet I never commanded more than 50 in my entire life, and all at the age of 19. Well, good fortune would follow me again. For that very next evening, the people of Philadelphia were holding a ball for General Washington, a party. You know all about parties, don't you, madame? But this one held in honor of General Washington for defending the city of brotherly love. How I recall when he walked into the room. For I knew precisely who he was before he spoke, even though we had never met before. It was simply by the way in which he carried himself. For to me, he was truly an aristocrat without the name, a nobleman without the title. He came forth, he held out his hand, he said to me, I thank you, Monsieur le Marquis, for coming to support this cause. Think of this new place as your new home. Think of the officers around you as your new family. And think of me as your new friend. And with this, I could not help myself. I immediately embraced him. I think I might have embarrassed him a little bit with my French custom. But I said to him, from now on, mon général, j'ai deux patries, la France et les États-Unis d'Amérique. From now on, I shall have 2 countries, France and the United States of America. And thus, my great adventure had begun.